Can you become more productive by making a task management app? Maybe, maybe not. I wanted to try it out. For this project, we are going to use React as always, no additional plugins, except if you want to use SCSS, you will need to install the SCSS plugin for React. But apart from that, we can just straight go into coding. I have a few things prepared already, so I made a new React app. I have the components folder with a couple of empty components. I have a styles folder with a properties file which has all of the colors that I'm going to be using, and I have a separate SCSS file for all of my components, but it's mostly just positioning things by flexbox, centering things, and applying different colors and spacing, and that's pretty much it. The idea is we are going to have a main app which is going to call 3 different status lines: backlog, to do, or stuff that's in progress, and the stuff that is finished or done, which you can then use to put your tasks in them, as in a real task management app, where you first have a backlog of things that you need to do. You have things that you're currently working on, and then you have things that you have finished working on. We want to make it so you can transfer your tasks from one status line to the next one or to the previous one, and you are also going to be able to delete it. I already have a heading here saying task management, and below that we are going to add a main tag. We're going to add a main tag which is going to have a section in there, and in the section we want to have 3 of our status line components, and in each status line we want to pass in a couple of things. So we will pass in task. We don't have any of this yet. I'm going to set this up, but I want to first add it over here so you know what we are adding in there. So tasks are going to be the list of tasks that are currently in the state that we're going to control. Then we will have a function for adding an empty task, which is going to equal add empty task. Then there will be a function for adding a task, which is going to be a full task with all of the properties. Then delete task is going to be our function for deleting a task. Then we will have a function for moving a task between different status lines. So move task, and in the end we are going to have a status for that line, which is going to be different for different lines, like I said. So this one is going to be a string called backlog, which we're going to use as a heading and also as a status for those particular tasks. Now I can go ahead and copy this here, except we are going to change this to in progress, and over here we are going to change it to done. Now, in order for this to work, I need to have all of these functions, which we are going to implement later. So first, we are going to import use state from React. Then we are going to use the use state here by saying tasks and set tasks equals use state. And we're going to set an empty array. Oh, and also we are going to use the use effect hook. So we need to import that as well. For now, I'm just going to say use effect, and we're going to say using effect. And over here, we need to pass in an empty array because we are going to use the use effect hook only on the page load, so once. And why are we going to do that? Because we are going to set all of this up so our tasks are being saved in the local storage in the browser. We're not going to use any sort of database to not overcomplicate things. We are just going to pass in all of our object data into the local storage, and then we are going to load it on the page load. So in order to do that, we need to pass in an empty array as a callback function, which for the use effect hook means it's going to run only once on the page load. And like I said, we are going to have a bunch of functions here. So add empty task, which is going to take in the status, and then we are going to do different things here. Then we have another function called add task, which is going to accept the task to add, and then we're going to do different things with it. Then we have a function delete task, which is going to accept the task ID for the task that we want to delete from the state. Then we have the move task function, which is going to accept the ID and the new status. So the ID is the ID of the task that we want to move, and the new status is the status to which we are moving it. And we will have two more functions here called save tasks to local storage, which is going to accept a list of tasks, and we're going to save them. And also we're going to have a function called load tasks from local storage, which is not going to have any parameters. And that's pretty much it for now. So if I hit save, all of this should work, all of this should not work. So here I need to say import, not import, and this is going to be console log using effect. And now it should work. Now in the status line, we need to import task from task, because we are going to generate tasks here. And we are going to accept the props that we just passed in there. So the props are going to be status, tasks with one S, add and all of our functions. So add task, delete task, add empty task, and move task, which is going to be equal to props. We're going to have a couple of helper properties here, task a list and tasks for status. We're accepting the whole list of tasks, and then we are filtering for those that belong to this specific status line. We are going to need a function for adding the empty task, which is just going to call the add empty task and passing in a status. This is basically just going to generate a little task that has all of its fields empty, and it's going to be put in the state, but we're not going to save it until we actually hit the save button. But that is for later. Now, what we want to do is, like I said, we want to filter all of our tasks for this status line. So if we have tasks, what we want to do is we want to set tasks for status to be equal to tasks dot filter, and then we are going to say for each task we want to return task dot status equals to status, which means we are getting only the tasks that belong to this particular status line. And after that we want to generate the tasks. So we're going to say if tasks for status. So if we have any tasks here, we are going to say our new task list is going to be tasks for status, which we want to map. And we are going to say for each task, do return. And what we are returning is a task component which has properties, and properties are most of the functions. So add task, which is equal to task, fat line, fat arrow, add task, and then we pass in the task. Then we do the similar thing for delete, where we say ID and we call delete task for the ID. What we are basically doing here is we are passing in the functions as we did from the app.js to the status line. We are doing the similar thing here with passing in the use state functions into the task component. For move task, once again, similar thing. We're going to have ID, status, fat arrow, move task, and ID and status. We need to set up a key because we are mapping stuff. So task.id, and task is going to be equal to the task itself. Now we can actually move on and generate stuff over here. So in our JSX, we are going to say h3, which has a status property. So we want to set a heading. Let's see if that works. So that works, and these are already getting stacked because I've set it to start stacking on like 1000 pixels or something like that. So keep that in mind. We can keep it like this just to see on the proper monitor width what's going on. And then we're going to pass in the task list over here. We are going to add a button with class name of button and add task. And for the text, we're just going to set a plus sign. So this is what we get. To the button, we want to add an on-click event saying handle add empty, and this function needs to be called handle add empty. And that's it. This is pretty much it for the status line. Now we are going to move on to the task component. In the task component, we are also going to use state. So we need to import it from React, and we are accepting some props as we saw. So we are going to have const add task, delete task, move task, and the task itself, which equals to props. Then for our use state hook, we are going to have a couple of things here. So we are going to have the urgency level, which is going to be like a label that you can set to the task. Set urgency level equals use state. And for the default, we're going to say task urgency because each task is going to have its urgency set up. So this is going to apply when we already are loading tasks from the local storage. Next, we have collapsed, and set collapsed equals use state task dot is collapsed. This is a property which we are going to use to collapse the task when it's been saved. I basically made it so when you create a task, you see everything. When you hit save, it collapses the task, so you only have the title, the label, and the buttons for switching between lines and for editing and deleting. Next, we have form action, set form action, which is going to use state and empty string. This is going to be used for our form for submitting. Every task is going to basically have a form, and its properties are going to be form fields. So we're going to have two buttons for submitting a form. One is going to be editing and one is going to be deleting, and we want to distinguish which button was used when submitting a form. We are going to have a function for setting urgency, which is going to accept the event, and it's going to set urgency level to be event.target. attributes dot urgency dot value. Now, this is basically going to be us clicking on a radio button, and it's going to pick up the value from the radio button and set the urgency to whatever was clicked on. Next, we're going to have handle submit, which is also going to take in the event, and then it's going to do a lot of stuff in there, which we're going to explain later. Then we are going to have a function handle move left, which is going to move things to the left, and we are going to have a function called handle move right, which is going to move things to the right. And for the task, it's going to have a class names of task, and we're also going to add a condition here saying if it is collapsed, we are going to set it to collapsed task. And if not, we're going to do nothing. Then we are going to have buttons here for moving stuff to left and to the right. So button, which has a text of this, which is just these are double arrows to the left. And we're going to have another button, which is going to have double arrows to the right. And this is the text that this is the code that you need to use for that. They are both going to have an on click event. This one is going to say handle move left, and it's going to have a class name of button and move task, because I've set this up already. And like I said, we can just copy this to this button, and we're going to say this is going to be handle move right. And now between them, we are going to add a form, which is going to have an on submit event called handle submit, which we declared, but we didn't set up code for it. And the class name is also going to check if this is collapsed. If the task is collapsed, then it's going to have a collapsed class. And if it's not, then we're not going to do anything. And we need to close the tag. Next, we need to add an input. This is going to be a title input. So we're going to say input and close it. We're going to say type equals text. Its class names are going to be title, and input. Name is going to be title. Placeholder is going to be enter title. We are going to disable this if the collapsed is true. So like I said, if when we save the task, we are going to collapse it, and we also want to disable properties. For default value, we are going to set task.title, and that's it for this input. Next, we're going to have a text area, which is also an input, and we're going to say rows equals 2, class name equals description input, name is going to be description. We are going to set placeholder, enter description. And for the default value, we are going to set task.description. That's it for the text area. Now we are going to have a div with a class name of urgency labels. And inside, we are going to set up label with a class name of low, this is going to be the low urgency label, and we're going to say if urgency level equals low, then we are going to apply the class of selected, and this is how we are going to differentiate them in CSS. If you click on a particular label, if it's not, then we're not going to do anything, and we close that. And then we're going to add an input over here inside of the label, which is going to be our radio button. So for urgency, we're going to say low. On change, we are going to say set urgency. For the type, we are going to say radio, and the name is going to be urgency. We are going to set up another 2 same labels and inputs, and we are just going to switch them to be medium and high. So this is going to be medium, and if urgency level is medium, then this is going to be selected. Urgency is going to be equaling to medium, and this is going to be high. So if we have a high urgency, this is going to have a class name of high. If urgency level is high, this is going to be selected, and urgency is going to be high. Next, we need to add the save button. So we have a button here, which is going to have an on click event saying fat arrow, and it's going to save set form action, and the form action is going to be save. It's also going to have a class name of button. For its text, we are going to say if this is collapsed, the text is going to be edit, and if it's not, it's going to be save, because we are going to reuse the button to create to save a task once we are done with setting up its properties. And once it's saved, it's going to collapse, and then we want to reuse the same button to be able to edit the task, to reverse the collapsing, to be able to see all the properties and start editing the task. Right below that, we want to have another button which is going to be used for deleting. So we're going to set its text to X, and it's also going to have an on-click event saying pretty much the same thing as the save button, and it's going to set the form action, but it's going to set it to delete and not to save. And it's also going to have a class name which is going to be button delete, because we want to style it a bit differently. And we also want to hide this if the task is not collapsed. So we're going to say we're going to wrap it inside of the curly brackets and say collapsed end. Sorry, the curly brackets go here. So when this is collapsed, then it's going to show, and if it's not collapsed, we're not going to see the delete button. We're going to handle the submitting. So for handle submit, first of all, we need to prevent defaults. Sorry, event prevent default. Next, we need to check a couple of things. So we say if form action equals save, we want to save. But before we do that, we need to check if this is collapsed. If you remember, we are using the form action save for both saving and editing. When we click the save or edit button, we need to check is it save or edit button, and this is save button when it's not collapsed, and when it is collapsed, it is the edit button. So in case we are clicking on the edit button, we just want to uncollapse the whole task and make everything editable again. We don't actually want to submit anything. So we are just going to set collapsed to false. That's basically it, because we are handling with the collapsed state, we are basically controlling the editability of our properties. And in CSS, I also set up the properties to not be visible, for most of the properties to not be visible if they are under the collapsed class. The only thing visible are, like I said, the buttons and the title and the label. And we're going to say else we want to create a new task which we want to save, and it's going to be a new object which is going to have the properties of id task.id. Title is going to be event.target.elements.title.value. Description is equal to event.target.elements.description.value. Urgency is equal to urgency level, which is our state. Status is equal to task.status, and is collapsed is going to be set to true. When we create a new task, we want to collapse it immediately. Then we are going to say add a task, and we are adding the new task. We are going to set the collapse state to true in the end. In the end, we want to say if the form action was not saved, we want to say if form action equals delete, then we just want to delete this task. And to do that, we call the delete task and we pass in the task ID. And for handling move to the left, we are basically going to handle its we're going to handle the status of the task which is going to be moved, and these are going to do pretty much the same thing. They are just going to have a different condition for which status lines are available to them. I've set them up to different functions just so it's a bit more readable what's going on. So we're going to say let new status, and we're going to set that as an empty string. And then we're going to say if task.status equals to in progress, then the new status is going to be equal to backlog. If we're moving stuff to the left, if the task is in progress, then it's moving to backlog, and if it's in done, it's moving to in progress. And if we're moving to the right, if it's in backlog, it's moving to in progress, and if it's in progress, it's moving to done. Else, if task.status equal to done, we are setting new status to be in progress, and that's it. And then we are saying if we have set up our new status to something, so it's not equal to an empty string, then we are going to do move task, and we're going to pass in task ID and new status. And this is literally going to be the same for handle move right, except we are going to say if this is backlog, then new status is in progress. And if this is in progress, then new status is done. Once we have all of this set up, we need to go back to the app.js component. We need to actually implement all of these functions over here. So for adding an empty task, we are passing in the status in which we are setting it up. So we're going to say, in order to set up the ID, we're basically going to pick up the last task that was added, pick up its ID and set it up to one more. So we're going to say last task equal to tasks, and in there we're going to pass in tasks.length -1, and we're going to say let new task ID equals 1. So this by default is going to be 1 if we don't find anything, and we are going to say if last task not equal to undefined, we're going to say new task ID equals last task dot ID +1, and then we are going to call set tasks, and inside we're going to say tasks tasks, and we're going to set them to a new array, which is we're going to use the spread operator here. Spread operator basically gets all of the tasks and basically merges them with the new object that we're going to set here. And the new object is basically an empty task object, which is going to have properties of ID equal new task ID, which we just set. Title is going to be an empty string. Description is going to be an empty string as well. Urgency is going to be an empty string, and status is going to equal to status. In the function add task, we are going to say let filtered tasks equal to tasks.filter, and for each task we are going to say return task.id not equal to task.add.id. What we're basically doing here is we're checking if we're adding a task that already has an ID. And the use case where it has an ID is where we added an empty task. We now don't want that empty task. We want to switch it with the new task, which has all the properties. So we're saying filter all of that out. And we're going to say new task list is going to be equal to filter tasks plus the task to add. Then we're going to set tasks, and we're going to pass in the new task list, and we are going to save the tasks to local storage, which we have not yet implemented, but we will. Next, for deleting a task, we are passing in the task ID, and we're also going to say let filtered tasks equal to tasks.filter, and inside we're going to say task return task.id not equal to task ID. We're basically removing the task with that ID from the list, and we are setting the tasks to the filter tasks list. So basically just removing that one task, and once again we are saving the filtered tasks to the local storage. For moving a task, we are going to say let task equal to tasks.filter. Once again, filtering to find that specific task. Return task.id equal to the ID. So we are just looking for that one specific task. Then we are going to remove once again that task from the task list. So tasks.filter task fat arrow and return task.id not equal to ID. So in this case we are finding that task, and in this case we're removing it from the list of tasks. Then we're just going to say task.status equals to the new status, which we are moving the task to. And then we are once again joining the list. So new task list equals to filter tasks and the task that we just changed the status for. Then we are setting tasks to the new task list, and once again saving tasks to local storage, new task list. Now to save the tasks to the local storage, we need to call localStorage, which is the browser object, and there's a function there called setItem, and we want to set the tasks item. And to be able to set the item that is a bit more complicated than a string, because local storage only stores strings, we need to stringify this with the command json.stringify, and we pass in our tasks. If you want to check out more about handling local storage, you can check out my other video for creating a dark mode in React. And that's pretty much it for saving tasks. Now for loading tasks, we need to say let loaded tasks equal local storage, and we are now using get item, and we are getting our tasks. And then we are saying let tasks equal. Now the same way we need to stringify it, we need to parse it back from a string. So we need to say json.parse, and we parse loaded tasks. And if we found anything, we say if tasks and set tasks to tasks. That is a lot of tasks. Now, like I said, we want to load from local storage only once on the page load. And to do that, we need to go back to the use effect, and instead of this here, just paste a load from local storage. So I made a mistake here. To each status line, we need to pass in the tasks. So all tasks, not just a single task. And inside of the task component, I actually forgot to add the text here. So we need to have a text for each label. So low, medium, and high. So now if I open up the app and I click on the plus sign, I can say this is a task A. I can enter some description, set its priority to low, hit save. If I want to add a task in progress, I can say task B, also has some description, hit the medium label, hit save, and in done, I can also add task C, give it a description, priority was high, hit save, and like you can, as you can see, there is in the collapse status, we have the arrows on the right and on the left, we have the label showing, we have the title showing, there is an option to edit the task, there is an option to delete the task, and you can freely move them between the different status lines. And that's pretty much it. Now we have a functioning task management app, which you can use to boost your productivity. There are definitely things that can be added to it. It can be improved. This is just a concept of how I would go about making an app like this. There is a cool plugin that you can use called React Beautiful DND, where DND is short for drag and drop, which you can use for something like this to be able to just move around your tasks instead of just clicking on different buttons. I didn't go with that route, but that's definitely something that could be used to improve this. As usual, all of the code is going to be available on my GitHub repo and on my website. Make sure to subscribe for more videos like this. My name is Alex, and I will see you in the next one.